Tonight, we are understanding clinical trials in multiple sclerosis by MS Views and News. And tonight's guest, we have MS neurologist, Dr. Ben Thrower, who's the medical director at the Andrew C. Carlos Multiple Sclerosis Institute at the Shepherd Center in Atlanta, Georgia. And we have MS patient advocate, Damian Washington, who's also a social media creator. And both of these people will be on here tonight talking with each other. Well, they're going to be doing presentations and talking with each other. This is a Sanofi-sponsored program, and the topics were developed in partnership with Sanofi or Sanofi. And I am going to be gone for this whole program. Dr. Thrower is going to be running this program. And so I'm just going to take it away and let him go with the flow now. Okay? Thank you.
Very good, Stuart. Thank you for being here. And Damian, thank you for being here. Damian, we're going to come back to you in just a few minutes. I'm going to go through a presentation, and I'll let you go ahead and mute and sign off, and I'll bring you back shortly. To all of our viewers this evening and anyone who might listen to this in the future, we really appreciate your participation. We're going to take a look at research, both from the kind of the big picture standpoint, and then go into some specifics as it relates to multiple sclerosis, and talk a little bit about some of the challenges we've seen and some potential gaps in our understanding as it relates to research in terms of who participates in research. So with that, as Stuart said, thank you very much to our sponsors this evening. I should note that this content of our program this evening was developed in concert with Sanofi, and that this is not eligible for continuing medical education for those who might have been interested. So when we think about research, why do we do research? There are numerous reasons why we might, but some of the bigger reasons would be to better understand the health issue. And when we think about, for instance, multiple sclerosis, we're going to talk about some of the things we learned in the past few years, and how how that can then lead to potentially developing new and better therapies. Because ultimately, it's not just about understanding a health problem; it's about doing something with it. We would like to develop newer diagnostic tools when we're looking at given health issues. So what has research given us as it relates specifically to multiple sclerosis? I'm old enough to have been around in the MS world in 1992, when we had no FDA-approved disease-modifying therapies for multiple sclerosis. And when you count the different generics and biosimilar options that we have right now, we have over 25 FDA-approved treatment options for managing multiple sclerosis. Research has given us the ability to diagnose MS much more quickly, and obviously this is vital. We know that the sooner we can make the diagnosis, the sooner we can get someone on an appropriate treatment and hopefully prevent problems down the line. Research has given us a better understanding of how the environment contribute to the risk of multiple sclerosis, with lots of findings as it relates to, say, vitamin D and Epstein-Barr virus. And something that I'm particularly interested in, and I know many of you would be as well, we are getting closer to the idea of actually reversing disability, which to me is the holy grail of MS research. So there are different types of clinical studies out there. So one of the types of trials that you might participate in would be an observational trial. With an observational trial, these are usually not experimental therapies. These are trials where we might say take two FDA-approved treatments and say, well, we know what the research says about them, but let's see what these look like in the real world. Let's take real individuals who are on these drugs. They would be on these medications or therapies anyway, and we're just going to see how they do over long periods of time and collect information on them. If there are epidemiologic studies, so epidemiology looks at who gets a certain health problem, what are the factors for a certain health problem, are there differences across different groups, different people, and these can be very, very important studies. When a lot of us think of research, I think we think of treatment trials, and the classic treatment trial would be the randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. So when we say randomized, this means, so let's say, for instance, we have a drug and a placebo that you are randomized by a computer, literally, that's going to put you into either that treatment arm or the placebo arm. When we say double blind, we mean that you don't know which arm you're in, and we as researchers know which arm you're in. And placebo is just that. So it's a sham treatment. Another way of doing treatment trials is what we call an active comparator trial. So maybe we take a known FDA-approved therapy and we're going to compare it to a potential a new research drug and see how these two things look. So who are the different players in research? Well, the most important person would be you if you're participating in a clinical trial. So you would be the study subject, and everything about that trial is going to revolve around you. And we're going to talk some about, the safety and some safeguards we put into that into clinical research. Principal investigators, these are the people actually running the study at that research site. So I've been the principal investigator on over 80 trials over the years, and I will tell you that I am not the most important person. The study subject is ultimately most important, but the team of people around the principal investigator. So these are usually research coordinators, and they are the nuts and bolts people. They're the ones who are making sure that things are happening in just the right order, that all of the paperwork that has to be done or computer gathering of data, that all of these things are happening the way they're supposed to happen. Most trials have a sponsor. So with a lot of things with drug trials, there's going to be a pharmaceutical company who is actually asking the research question. That pharmaceutical company is going to reach out to a third party called a CRO, a clinical research organization. That clinical research organization is the organization that sort of with me or other principal investigators and for the liaison between us and the study sponsor, and is really making sure that everything is moving along according to schedule. So this is what clinical research looks like in terms of the different phases. So when we start over on the left-hand side of the screen, this is, someone has an idea. They think, molecule X or drug X would have a treatment effect. And maybe they're looking at it in a test tube model. Maybe they're looking at it in animal models. So this is before it actually gets to humans. If that looks promising, we're going to move then to a phase 1 trial. Phase 1 trials are a lot about the pharmacokinetics of the potential treatment. What does it do in the bloodstream? If I give you dose X, how much of that gets into your bloodstream or the tissue where you want it? Sometimes these phase 1 trials may be done in healthy volunteer subjects. So these may be individuals who don't have the health condition that we're looking at. Some phase 1 trials do involve the people who actually are working with, who are dealing with the health issue at hand. Once we move past that and have some sense of the pharmacokinetics and maybe have collected some safety data, so we move into a larger phase 2 trial. Phase 2 will definitely involve individuals living with whatever health condition we're looking at. This is also going to maybe collect more pharmacokinetic data, and here we really start getting into the safety and potential benefits of it. Once that's done, when most of us think of clinical research and research that ultimately gets a drug FDA approved, it's the phase 3 trial. So these are your large randomized trials. There may be sites all over the world doing this. There will usually be, large numbers of individuals in these trials. This is the data that's going to be collected and ultimately presented to whatever regulatory agency, depending upon the country. So for us here in the U.S., it would be the FDA. Once the drug is FDA approved, there may still be more research. You may have a phase 4 trial. And this is done after the drug is approved. This may look at refining what the drug looks like in certain patient populations. So for instance, maybe the phase 3 trial looked at individuals who had already been on a treatment for a given health condition, and maybe the phase 4 is going to look at people who've never been on any treatment. Or maybe you're going to look at slight variations on a sort of dosing regimen or how quickly a drug is given in those phase 4 studies. When we take this as a spectrum, from that preclinical work through phase 3, the drug gets FDA approval, the average length of time for that process is about 12 years. The average cost is about $350 million, although it can be quite a bit more in some studies. And the success rate is about 7%. So 93% of drugs actually see the light of day. They never get FDA approval. So for you as a study subject, if you were thinking about participating in a clinical trial, what we really want you to look at are the risks and benefits. And some of the questions that you should ask yourself would be, does this research offer me something unique, a unique treatment option that I really wouldn't have access to except through this trial? Are there other options? Do I have FDA approved treatment options that have a known safety and efficacy? So we think about other options that you have. What are the known risks of this research therapy? What are the requirements, the logistics, for this trial? And finally, what happens if my health condition that I'm looking at is worse during the study? What's the game plan? So the possible benefits of participating in a clinical trial is, again, you may get access to a new therapy that would not be accessible to you through any other means. The medication is frequently paid for, so there should be no cost. The diagnostic tests, MRIs, lab work, all of these things should be provided by no cost. There may be compensation. They may help you cover your travel. They could cover hotel stays, meals, if that were required. And there may be compensation even beyond that. And then, there is just contributing to the body of science. We do hear individuals who want to participate in clinical research just because they want other people to have more treatment options for whatever health condition they're working with, and that's going to occur through research. What are some possible risks of participating in a clinical trial? Well, we probably don't know the effectiveness of that therapy, so that's why it's being studied. We probably don't know all of the risks associated with that therapy. Be aware that research visits can be lengthier. They may be half day or longer affairs, and they may be more frequent than your regular clinical course would be. And so again, we need to think about the logistics. How far do you live from that research center, and is it really feasible for you to meet the requirements of that trial? And then we always need to be aware if it's a placebo-controlled trial, and if you have a health condition that is not going to go treated through that placebo exposure, is there risk in potentially being on a placebo group? I will say that most studies, a couple of slides ago we mentioned that what's the game plan if you get worse. Most studies have a safety valve, if you will, that if you are getting worse during the trial, you can potentially be unblinded so that you and the principal investigator now know whether you were on active treatment or placebo and can act accordingly. So there are various organizations that really their sole reason for being is to protect people who do participate in research. One of those would be the Office of Human Research Protections. That's a federal agency. The FDA also plays a role in making sure that clinical research is done ethically and with as much attention to safety as possible. Every clinical study has a group called the Data Safety Monitoring Board. So these are people that are sitting behind the scenes looking at for any safety concerns that come in. They are aware of who's on placebo, who's not on placebo, and so they're really watching that. And finally, at each research site, there will be something called an institutional review board. We'll take a little closer look at that. So the Institutional Review Board, so for instance, here at Shepherd Center where I'm at, we have our own Institutional Review Board. Many universities have their own Institutional Review Board. Or you may have a regional Institutional Review Board that covers multiple different institutions. But these all function in a very similar way. This is made up of healthcare professionals, scientists, maybe attorneys, maybe individuals living with the health condition that you're looking at. And then sometimes there are clergy members, rabbis and priests and whatnot, that also kind of look at things from a more ethical standpoint. So these folks' job is to make sure that we're really balancing the potential benefits of the trial versus the potential risks of the trial, and not only approve whether an institution can do study, they're going to be kept informed all through the duration of that study as to what's going on, or any new safety concerns, and we continue with that study. So a very important part of clinical trials would be informed consent. We call it the informed consent process. And each of those words are important. So when we say informed, we mean that we want you as a potential study subject, your significant others, your family, really understand what it means to participate in this trial. What are the risks and benefits? What are the other options that you have? What do we know about any potential safety issues that might come along with participating with a clinical trial? Once you're informed, you are then asked to give your permission, your consent. Do you agree that this is something you want to participate in? And we say process because this is not something that stops once you sign that piece of paper. It is an ongoing thing. As new information comes in, or maybe new treatments become available, whatever health condition we're looking at, we want to make sure that you are constantly reevaluating that risk-benefit ratio, and based upon any new information that comes in, are you still agreeable to participating in this trial? As that information comes in, it's also going to the institutional review board so that they're kept up to date on any new developments. So one of the challenges of clinical research is, what do these study populations look like? This is what the real world looks like. And so every study has what we call inclusion and exclusion criteria. So, what age group are we looking at? What type of, so for instance, with multiple sclerosis, what disability levels are we looking at? Are we looking at relapsing MS or progressive forms of MS? And it seems like there's a little bit of a battle between what the pure research that people designing these trials want and what we might want in the clinical realm. Researchers want as homogeneous of a study population as possible. You want as few variables, so if you were to sort of ask researchers, they might jokingly say, we would love to have a group of all 18 to 20-year-old men with absolutely no health, no problems, and on no medications. Well, the problem with that is that's not the real world. So you may show that a drug works in a narrow patient population, but does it work to get it out into a more diverse population? And that study group may not reflect. So why is diversity in research so vital? Well, it reduces that bias that you've looked at a narrow group that really reflect the real world. It does promote social justice to have research available to everybody who's interested in participating so that we can promote health equity. It produces more valid and innovative science as well. So one of the things that's sort of interesting, and this applies to multiple sclerosis, and it really applies to clinical research in general, is that MS studies have tended to be not as diverse as we would like for them to be. In general, more than 10% of study subjects in MS clinical trials have been from minority populations. If you look at the general population with that circle graph on the left, the general population, we see 16% of the general population would be Hispanic, and the 12% would be African American. And now go to the pie chart on the right, and you'll see that those numbers that we see in the general population are not very well reflected in clinical research. We have a significant underrepresentation of minority groups in our clinical trials. If we look specifically at Black people, why might that be? And I think the first bullet here is probably the most important point. That may be in large degree due to mistrust. when surveys have been done and they've given Black communities certain words like research and experimental therapy, and say, well, what does that word have positive or negative connotations to you? There's a tendency for those terms to have negative connotations, that they bring up ideas of things like being a guinea pig or a lab rat. So one of the things that I think is still very seared into certain people's memory is the Tuskegee experience. So, with the Tuskegee experience, you had large numbers of Black men who had syphilis and who were purposefully not treated without their knowledge. And it was an epidemiologic or a sort of observational study done with zero informed consent to see what happened to people if you didn't treat syphilis, and very bad things happen if you don't treat syphilis over time. So that is still very much in some people's memory, and it has a very negative sort of effect on whether they're willing to participate in clinical research. So when we think about multiple sclerosis in particular, one of the reasons it is so important that we have diversity in our clinical trials is we know that who is affected by MS has changed. So the old view of multiple sclerosis was that there were about 400,000 individuals in the United States, and the majority of these would have been white females. And new research has shown that we have far more people affected, 1 million at least in the United States, and that for the first time ever, we are identifying more Black females than any other group being newly diagnosed with MS. I think there are still questions about what that represents. Does it represent a true change in the demographics? Are we seeing truly more MS more likely to develop in Black females, or did we just miss it? As a medical community, we're so focused, and we were taught that it was more common in white females that we didn't look for it as much in Black females, and so it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I don't think we know the answer to that quite yet, or is it some of both? So again, Blacks and Latinos have traditionally been underrepresented in MS trials, and even though we're seeing more Black women diagnosed with MS than any other group, both racially and gender-wise, they are traditionally underrepresented in MS studies. So when we think about why that might be important, there is a suggestion that MS may be more aggressive in Black people. There's some evidence that immune responses may vary across different racial groups, and even responses to medications may vary across different racial groups. So again, if I do a study, I only focus on white males or white males, and I don't include representative numbers of people who are Latino or Black, I'm not going to pick up those differences, and it may have significant consequences for what treatment in the real world looks like. So how might we improve diversity in clinical research? I think these five points can really be summarized as: we need to build trust, and that's what it really comes down to. We need to bring these clinical studies into the communities themselves, into diverse communities. Ideally, we'd like to have researchers and their teams be just as diverse as the populations that we're serving. I think that helps build trust. I think in having long-term relationships and investments in the community, so that you're not just coming in and popping in to do a trial and then popping right back out and disappearing. That doesn't build trust. Engaging the community in conversations. We're going to circle back to this in just a moment, just to talk about why that's important in letting stakeholders who are actually dealing with the health problem have a significant say. And next one. We're going to finish that thought on letting stakeholders who are dealing with the health issue have a say. This is an interesting organization, PCORI. It's Patient-Centered Outcomes and Research Institute, a federal group that looks across a wide variety of health conditions. And what they're really trying to do is bring people with that health condition into the discussion. Say, well, here's what research might think is important. What do you think is important in research? What are the things you would really like to see addressed and questions answered in research? So specific to MS, there have been grants that have been given out from numerous MS trials. This organization has been around since about 2010, and they're in the billions of dollars that there's in research grants that they have given out. The largest research grant that we have ever been given in multiple sclerosis here at Shepherd was actually through this organization. So with that, I'm going to stop, and we're going to bring in back on so that we're going to do exactly what we said. We're going to hear from someone living with multiple sclerosis to get some perspectives, from someone who's dealing with it. So Damian, thank you for hopping back on. We really appreciate you being here. So I just would love to get your thoughts. So I'd love to hear what you think about, how do you think people know about trial? How do they find out about them? Where do they go to find out these things? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Firstly, thank you, Dr. Thrower. Thank you, MS Views News, and thank you for everyone who is here at this event, getting this wonderful information. And that's kind of the point. Like, it's tough to know about these clinical trials because there aren't advertisements about it. It's not like you turn on the television or there's like pop-ups or on your computer or anything. And I've only mainly been involved in clinical trials because Dr. Miss Joy Williams, she and I are friends and colleagues, and I saw that she was doing something, so I wanted to be around her and be a part of things that she was doing. So the clinical trial history that I've had, experience that I've had, I've only heard about because of a friend. And if you're not plugged into something like that, you might miss on that opportunity.
Yeah, that's so very true. I mean, we don't know what we don't know sometimes. So what do you think are some of the, yeah, what do you think are some of the limitations to access to clinical trials?
Yeah, no, it's again that plugged in thing. And a lot of people's doctors they're not plugged in to the network as well themselves. So how can you possibly know about upcoming clinical trials if even your doctor doesn't know about upcoming clinical trials? So it's a very difficult thing to break out of. And the more that we get accessible for people to know about, the more we get people participate.
So as a person living with MS, I mean, what would be your general gut feeling about clinical research? Positive, negative, likely to participate, not likely to participate?
Absolutely. Well, personally, I'm likely to participate. But if anybody wants to have a bit more information about the what's the term? Iatrophobia. Iatrophobia, that's the intense fear of doctors and the medical system and things like that. If you want a deeper dive on the receipts about that, just skim the book Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington. And that goes deeply into where this iatrophobia comes from, and not just the African-American population, but just people in general. But honestly, trials are the main way that medical professionals can just kind of get an idea about a therapy efficacy and how it works in a patient population. So, yeah, while there may be some trepidation, like if you're not on the front line working through these things, you can't necessarily want new therapies because you yourself are not getting in the game. You know what I mean?
It's so very true. Yeah, that just mistrust sometimes of the medical community in general, and fears that does the medical community have my interest at heart?
There's a whole term for it, doctor.
I know. I love that. Any other thoughts on just how we improve awareness, access, content of what where research is driven? Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, there just needs to be more awareness. The clinicaltrials.gov website, it's fine, but it can be certainly more aesthetically pleasing, so to speak. It's just a lot to take in. Antidote.me is a great site that has access to clinical trials, and it's a bit more user friendly, and it's a bit more just polished and clean and sort of more straightforward than the more clinical and listy clinical trial gov. So just knowing about it is a big part of it. Let's see. Also, there just needs to just be more patient engagement in general. And the more that you find yourself involved in your patient community as part of your condition, outside of your condition, sort of bringing everyone together, that's how you will really begin to make headways with that specific, not condition, but that specific point, you know?
So true. And I think that too, one of the challenges is, for you living in Los Angeles, for our patient population living in Atlanta, I mean, our folks have lots of MS centers. I mean, we have choices, and they're good comprehensive centers. For people living in rural areas, you look, and this is not saying anything bad about community neurologists, but community neurologists is taking care of MS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, epilepsy, migraines. It's very difficult to know everything that's going on in hospital search. So I encourage our patients who live in rural areas, if you can even touch bases with a comprehensive MS center just once a year, just go in and say, what's going on research-wise? What's the latest thing? And then they can also take that information back to their community person and actually serve as kind of an ambassador for MS. So we're very blessed.
Excuse me, doctor. That's why guys like me are helpful in this mix, because I'm out here doing that, and in also bringing it back to the patient population, which may not have that sort of access that a guy in the second largest city in America, or it's the doctor that's in the third largest city in America has. And the more that I go through those things and present them to folk, the more that more in different populations, like the rural populations, might be able to get involved if they don't have direct access to them.
Absolutely. And kind of bringing it home, for you personally, have you participated in or been asked to participate in clinical trials, and any personal last thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, being a part of Dr. Williams's trial, from not specifically the clinical part, but also just the patient part. Hey, there are other ways that you can get involved. Like I was in a patient advisory group for her and her trial, and that is like once or twice a month, every 6 months, 2 to 6 months. I sat in on 90-minute sessions, just talking about the design and the videos and the flyers and doing social media campaigns and the language. So, you could get directly involved with the medicine and the pill and like, is this doing what I think it's going to be doing? Or you can also get involved with the structure of the trial and how that trial speaks to patient populations. There's a lot of ways to get in, and I say you get in where you fit in. So if you are, have one set of trepidation about taking the med so much on the front line, you can be a part of the patient advisory group that's looking over the materials and just making sure that they all speak to the patient's perspective. And trust me, that's no small point. Your perspective and your experience is vital and quite necessary to make sure that these trials speak to the patient population, and that's you.
Well, thank you so much, Damian. Thank you for your advocacy and what you do to educate people. Thank you to Synovus for making this possible tonight, and for Stuart and his whole staff at MS News and Views for putting all of this together. To the viewers and the participants, we really appreciate you being here, and we look forward to the next time together. And everyone have a wonderful evening.
Peace. Good night, everybody.